So, after my posts with regards to making soap, I've been asked by several people if I would consider to do some kind of soap making tutorial video. So I'm just going to do a brief video, a brief introduction, just to show you how I do it and give you some ideas, maybe give you some inspiration of how you might be able to do it yourself. Now, of course, for the way that I make it, I developed my own recipe, I formulated my own recipe. And if you go out on the internet, you'll find there's no end of recipes out there that have already been formulated by other people. Now, I don't intend to give away my own recipe, that was for my soap. But I would suggest that you have a look at a program called SoapCalc, or a site called SoapCalc on the net, which will enable you, if you feel that way inclined, to actually formulate your own soap from scratch, to use the oils that you choose to use, to play with it in order to get the parameters that you wish to put into your soap. The creaminess, the hardness, the cleansing ability, the moisturising ability, these all come from the different blend of oils that you put in. And the SoapCalc formulator is actually really quite easy to use and will give you a whole recipe. So I'll put the address for that right on the bottom of the screen now. So, making soap is actually really rather easy. In fact, I had no idea how easy it was until I actually tried doing it myself. It really doesn't need that much specialist equipment. Most of what you use is household stuff, and you can usually find it laying around, but of course, you know, as you go further into it, you'll probably want to make sure that you get your own stuff. And quite honestly, you know, for the sake of good hygiene, as it were, you should really keep this stuff away from things that you're going to be making food with. Most of what we use, well, all of what we use is entirely natural. These are vegetable oils, vegetable butters, beeswax, obviously, essential oils, even the caustic soda. I mean, caustic soda, sodium hydroxide, is a plentiful chemical from the earth itself. The alkaline lakes and all those kind of things. Sure, it's very dangerous, just as the same as many other chemicals which the earth herself produces are not the sort of things that we want to bathe in or get on our skin and this sort of thing, and it deserves respect. As we go through this tutorial, I'm going to show you what I wear to handle it, and I would very, very, very strongly suggest that you take the safety precautions carefully. In particular, eye protection. You're not going to get a second chance if that stuff splashes in your eyes, so be very, very careful with it. But at the same time, there's no need to fear it. It's something that we can deal with, it's something that we can use quite easily, and particularly using the correct kind of protection, there won't be any problem whatsoever. Okay, so now I'm going to start getting things together and showing you how I actually go through the process of making soap. So here you can see a little selection of some of the things, the equipment that I use for making soap. Digital balance I find really, really useful. A selection of measuring cups, glasses, those kind of things, just to weigh stuff out into basically, and to mix up your caustic soda. I'm going to use a big water bath to melt my oils, and then here are the silicone molds that I'm going to use. This will make me 21 small bars and 12 large bars of the sizes that I make, and they're fairly standard silicone molds that you can find on Amazon. Stick blender and spatula, these are very useful, obviously for stirring the oil to make the soap, but also then the spatula to get things into the molds. Here is the large bowl that I'll blend everything in, and here is my emergency vinegar. Just in case there is some kind of mishap, this is to splash on myself in order to neutralise the caustic soda. So I recommend that you have that beside you. Now I'm going to introduce the materials that I use in the soap making process. So mostly soap is made from oil. It's a saponification of oil, and so really what a lot of this particular soap is made with olive oil, and then I also use coconut oil in this. I use shea butter, This is actually shea butter that I get. I just get it off Amazon, and it comes unrefined. Doesn't necessarily need refining, but it's a heck of a lot easier to store it in a jar than it is in the bag, so I just melt it down to put it in the jar. This is castor oil, which I use in order to bring a certain creaminess to the soap. This is beeswax, which I get from a local apiary, and then I purify and cast into, well, I actually cast it into moulds that I also use for soaps. But this makes it a heck of a lot easier to use when it's in these small bars. And last but not least, cacao butter, which I get here in Guatemala. Again, we can also get that on Amazon if needs be. And the majority of the soap is going to be made from the olive oil and then the coconut oil. These are the two large ingredients, and then these are the four. These are much lower down the list. Now, the final ingredient, which we'll be handling later, is the caustic soda, which is mixed up separately. So now we're going to go ahead and weigh things out and measure them out and mix them up. So I'm going to start off with the olive oil. Now, the olive oil obviously is a liquid at room temperature, and so we don't need to melt that in any way. It's very easy to handle, and in fact I use it just to bring the temperature of the oils back down. Now, what you find is that when you're making soap, the reaction that you're going to have going on is between the caustic soda and the oils. That's saponification. Now, the greater the temperature, the quicker that reaction is going to go, and as you're going to see in a little while, this can be quite a challenge. What you want to be able to do is be able to get the soap into the mould whilst it's still liquidy, whilst it's able to mould, because otherwise it's going to get really, really difficult. Now, the higher the temperature, the quicker the reaction goes. The quicker the reaction goes, the less time you have to mould the soap. So we don't want the temperature to be too high when we put the soap into the mould. So as such, what we're going to do is we're going to add the olive oil as a secondary oil later on to cool the temperature back down once we've melted up all of these solid oils. Now I'm going to begin to weigh out the oils, and this is just as simple as anything else, as simple as cooking in whatever way you choose to use it. And what we're going to do is just going to add these solid oils into here and get them melted down and ready to make our soap with. So I have a recipe. As I said, this is a recipe that I formulated using the Soap Calc websites, their program, and it's a recipe that people that buy my soaps, people that work with my soaps, they seem to sell rather well. People seem to like what they do, and so as a consequence I keep doing what I do. You know, when you've got a winning formula, you kind of stick with it, don't you? You also don't divulge it to people, I guess. So sorry that you're not getting the recipe in there as well, but I can guide you through how to do that. So obviously, as you add your ingredients, you're always going to double check that you got it right. Whilst, you know, you don't have to use the most expensive ingredients for soap. I use this organic coconut oil, and I think it's, well, it's not my choice to use the organic one. I would rather use something which is a little bit of a lower grade. Whilst I support very much the organic growing initiative and this sort of thing, I feel quite sad about using such a good grade of oil to make soap with, because quite honestly we're going to rip it apart with sodium hydroxide, and when you rip it apart with sodium hydroxide, it doesn't matter whether it's going to be organic or non-organic, it's going to be destroyed. So it's like, let's kind of get real about this a little bit and say, well, do we really need to be that finicky about it? That said, it's not a bad thing either, you know. So it is what it is. But as I say, I don't go out of the way to use organic oils for this type of process because it just seems too wasteful to me. However, where I am, the largest containers of olive oil, coconut oil that I can get are actually these ones. So that's kind of why I'm using that one. So you see it's quite simple just measuring out each of the ingredients. It's what we would have called bucket chemistry back in the day, chucking things in together and watching what's going to happen. So this is the final of the oils that I'm adding, the castor oil that's going in there now. So what I have here now is a mixture of coconut oil, cacao butter, shea butter, beeswax and finally castor oil. Now that's all going to go over the double boiler so that we can melt it up and get it ready to be saponified. Now, of course, our soap wouldn't be much without it having a fragrance to it. And today we're making Brazilian orange soap. This is one of the ones that particularly appeals to me. This orange oil is a wonderful fragrance. I think there's somebody else that said it's very difficult not to imagine trying to eat this soap. I mean, obviously you're not going to, but it smells so good. And what you find is that the oils themselves, they get stronger when you add the, when you're actually washing with the soap. The soap might not necessarily smell of a lot, but as soon as you get it wet, especially with a bit of hot water, this fragrance really comes out. Now, that said, what I found when I was first making soap was that I found that my soaps didn't seem to have a lot of fragrance, and the standard level is around about 3% essential oil into the soap. I actually upped that to 5%, which makes my soaps just a little bit more expensive, but it also means that they actually really smell something. They really still retain the flavour of the essential oil that I use, or the aroma of the essential oil that I use. So I'm happy with that trade-off. You know, I would rather produce something which actually really has a wonderful smell that stays with you and does something, rather than something which is just says it contains this stuff, right? Now, the essential oil, this is something that we're going to put in last. You'll see as we go through the soap making process that we take our regular vegetable oils, we're going to add the olive oil to these, then we add the caustic soda. The caustic soda is going to react with the vegetable oils, and then when that reaction is well underway and the caustic soda is busy being consumed by the vegetable oils, at the end, at the point that we call the trace, where the soap to be has started to really thicken up, that's when we add our essential oil. Because if we put this in with the oils now, then it's going to get eaten by the sodium hydroxide and we're not going to be able to smell it. So it's very important that this goes in last. Okay, so now on to the serious bit. This is where we got to start using our PPE in order to work with this stuff, because honestly this is the stuff which we want to be very respectful of. This is sodium hydroxide, caustic soda, lye. It has several different names, and if we get it wrong, if we get it splashed on our skin, we're going to end up with a lot of problems. So really we need to make sure that we respect this stuff. Now, that said, it's not that difficult to handle. It usually comes as a flake like that, and we can measure it out as we would any other solid. Sodium hydroxide has a very interesting, if what somewhat unusual property, and that is that when it dissolves in water, it actually heats up. And so you have to be very, very careful about even the way that you mix the sodium hydroxide with water, because that's what we're going to have to do. and I used that in exactly the term that I intended to use it. We mix the sodium hydroxide with water. If you mix the water into the sodium hydroxide, the water will boil, and then it will throw the boiling caustic soda out all over you, which is obviously what you want to avoid. So I'm going to show you how I mix it, and then we can mix it safely. Here I am, I'm going to now combine the caustic soda with the water to create our caustic soda solution. You see, I'm just slowly, gently adding the caustic soda. Now, it's kind of interesting the way that this works, because obviously the hotter the solution gets, the quicker it will dissolve. And you see right now it's cloudy. Now, if I was to put my hand on the side of that jug, I'd find is that actually it's going to get quite hot. I don't know whether the temperature that we have outside today is enough to actually see it steam, but you can see that just on the side of the jug here, there's actually some condensation forming. Now, I choose to mix up the caustic soda outside simply because it does tend to fume a little bit just when you're mixing it up, and so I try to kind of like keep this out of the house because it's pretty irritating to the throat. I don't think it would necessarily do a lot of harm in the concentration that we have. It just seems like a better practice to do it that way. So as you can see, it doesn't take long to add the sodium hydroxide flake to the water. You can see that right now it's cloudy. As I say, that jar, if we touch that jar, is really rather warm to the touch. I would say that's probably somewhere around about getting on for 50-55 Celsius, I would imagine. And you can see just a little bit of steam coming off it. That's how hot the sodium hydroxide is going to make the water when it dissolves into it. So what we have there is a hot solution of sodium hydroxide. So this is something that we're going to be very, very careful with now. I mean, obviously this is not something that we want to spill on anyone or anything. So as we take it back into the house, we're going to be very careful with this. So now you can see that these are our oils that we've been mixing up, that we've been melting, and you can see that the majority of the oils have now melted. We're just really waiting on the beeswax to melt down in the solution. We have our trays ready, our moulds ready, we have our equipment ready, we have our gloves, we have the caustic soda there, we have our oils, the olive oil and the essential oil. So everything's pretty much ready to go. We're just waiting on the final melting of the beeswax, and then we're ready to actually start the process of soap making. Okay, so this is the final step. I'm going to put on my PPE and get myself prepared to turn these oils into soap. So here we are, there's the combined melted oils and olive oil. Here's our sodium hydroxide solution. There's our orange oil flavouring we're going to put in. Orange essential oil that we're going to put in. So here we go, watch this. So you see we have the clear oil and we have the sodium hydroxide. Now we're starting to use the stirrer, and of course this mixer aqueous solution into the oil. The first thing that happens is you get emulsification happening, and you see it's beginning to thicken up. Just going to change hands there. You see there's a thickening happening already. As the reaction takes place. So now we're going to see how that oil is thickening up. so it doesn't take long, and this reaction is going to go pretty quickly. So I want to make sure that I get this into the moulds before it comes to, how can we put it, gelatinous, that might be a good way to put it. So now I'm going to add my essential oil in. See, it's fairly robust. The majority of the work is in the preparation. Once we get to this stage, it's kind of pretty much just stirring and then moulding it. And that should be at the stage where I can now begin to mould it. And again, this is pretty easy. And it always reminds me of custard in a way. So when we have a nice, easy to work liquid like this, we're able to get it into the moulds, make some nice smooth tops on it, let's say. Sometimes handmade soap can look pretty ragged around the edges. When we are able to mould something that's this fluid, it can really make a nice, smooth, well presented, nice looking soap. So we can put that to one side. This one's pretty much done. And we can just nice and evenly distribute this through the moulds. You see, we're still, at the moment, we're still fluid enough to do this. Although that's not going to last very much longer, I can see it sort of more or less setting before my eyes at the moment. And there we go, that's pretty much it. It's nice and evenly distributed now. Now this is going to stay in its mould for about 48 hours. By that point it will be nice and solid. Then I shall turn it out and leave it to cure for around about 4 weeks. It will take to cure before it's able to be put into its wrapping, packaged and sent out to the stores and to the final consumer. And of course I'm unmolding the soaps. Well, there are different ways that you can mould it in the first place, but soap is basically a very similar kind of consistency to cheese when it's fresh, in that it's pretty easy to cut. And so what I tend to do is just to put it in the freezer for a little while, just to get it to harden up a little bit. And then I can take it out of the freezer and cut it into blocks so that it can be cured easily. So there's my standard size of mould. I'm just going to cut this piece into 3 pieces. And just keep cutting each one. Probably do with a little bit more time in the fridge. If you don't put it in the fridge or the freezer, what you find is that you just get a little bit of the soap kind of sticking to the mould just a little bit. And as you can see, it's still very easy to turn out, and it's still looking pretty good. All depends on kind of how much heat you've got going on, but the colder that you get the soap, the easier it is to turn out of the silicone, and you can just, again, it gives you a nicer finish on the soap when it's actually kind of nice and smooth. So this soap is 48 hours old. It's obviously one that I made a couple of days ago, not the batch that I just made. And this is now going to begin the rest of its 4-week cure. So basically I'm going to put it out of the way in a warm space and allow the reaction to continue and allow the water to evaporate, because as the water evaporates from the soap, and as there may be some amount of saponification still happening, but pretty much all the reaction is done. Now it's just a physical kind of evaporation of the water which is going on, and that's going to help the soap to harden. Now, one of the things that there are two possibilities if you put what we might call green soap out there, soap which hasn't been cured properly. One possibility is that it might burn somebody, which is obviously kind of like the worst thing that could possibly happen for our soap. And the second possibility is that it's going to be very soft. This is kind of one of the, let's say, problems that often happens with homemade soap, is that people say, well, it's kind of, it was smelled good, looked good and all that kind of thing, but when I actually came to use it, it dissolved really quickly. Now a lot of that is because there's too much water still in the soap, and it needs some time to cure. It needs some time for the soap to cure, harden up and evaporate a little bit more water out of it. And so that's what we do for the 4 to 6 weeks that we're going to cure it. Now, when I first started making soap, I was actually told 6 weeks, and so I let it for 6 weeks, and then I read some other things which kind of said, well, actually 4 weeks is perfectly enough. And so I put the two up against each other, and I tested my soap after 4 weeks, and I found that, yeah, it's absolutely fine. There was no problem with it whatsoever. So now 4 weeks is my minimum. I wouldn't even use it myself before then. I'm sure it'll be fine, but I just like to make sure that it's done as best as I can do it, really. So there you go. There's my batch of 12 2-ounce soaps, 12 50-gram soaps that is, and 21 1-ounce or 25-gram soaps. There they are, ready to go cure before they get wrapped up. Incidentally, with regards to wrapping, I tend to wrap them usually on about the 3rd week, just to kind of like make some space for myself in my curing trays, so that I've got some room in that. But this again seems to work well for them. So, I hope that you've enjoyed this first soap making tutorial. It's a first for me as well, and I hope this has inspired you to go and have a play, get your experimental head on and try making some soaps of your own. Enjoy!